The morning sun peeked over the rooftops, casting a warm glow on the quiet suburban street. In a modest backyard, an elderly man knelt beside a garden bed, his weathered hands gently tending to the plants that had become his steadfast companions. Arthur Donnelly, 68, found himself in the twilight of life. Since retiring from his career as a high school math teacher and losing his beloved wife Margaret to cancer, he often felt adrift, yearning to fill the long days with purpose. But in the small miracle of watching things grow, Arthur had slowly begun to find solace. He surveyed his garden with a critical eye, pleased to see the rich, dark earth damp with dew. Delicate pea shoots curled their way up a trellis, while the kale and spinach sprouted tender new leaves. The first daffodils and tulips added welcome splashes of color, harbingers of the vibrant blooms to come. Arthur bent to pull a few errant weeds, inhaling the loamy scent that reminded him so poignantly of Margaret. She had always longed for a bountiful garden, but the busy years of working and raising their 2 children had left little time. Now, in nurturing these plants, Arthur felt a connection to her dreams. A rustling drew his attention to the old elm tree that marked the boundary between his yard and the neighbors. A small face peered out from behind the trunk, the curious gaze of Lily Nguyen's son Max. "Good morning, Mr. Arthur," Max called, his smile missing a front tooth. "Whatcha doing?" Arthur gave a friendly wave. "Hello there, Max. Just tending to the garden, pulling some weeds to help the veggies grow big and strong." Lily emerged from behind the tree, her long black hair pulled back in a ponytail, her green scrubs wrinkled from a long shift at the hospital. "So sorry if he's bothering you, Arthur. We're running late this morning." "No bother at all," Arthur assured her. He genuinely enjoyed his brief chats with the young mother and her inquisitive son. In a neighborhood of mostly older residents, their youthful energy was a welcome change. Lily's eyes drifted to the tidy rows of plants. "Your garden is really shaping up. I'd love to grow a few veggies of my own, but I wouldn't know where to start. Between work and Max, I can barely keep a houseplant alive." She ended with a self-deprecating laugh. An idea began to take root in Arthur's mind. What if he shared his garden knowledge with Lily? It would give him a chance to interact more with his neighbors while keeping Margaret's dream alive. Before Arthur could respond, Max pointed to the mail truck puttering down the street. "Mom, look, mail's here." With a quick goodbye, Lily ushered Max back to their house to start their day. Arthur watched them go, wondering what might grow from a simple invitation to learn about gardening. As the morning warmed, Arthur made his way to the mailbox. A few bills, a grocery store flyer, and a powder blue envelope with his daughter's familiar handwriting. He smiled, eager to hear how Julia and her family were doing 2 states away. But as he read, the words on the page filled him with a bittersweet ache. "Dad," Julia wrote after the usual pleasantries and updates, "with your health issues last year, we've been thinking maybe it's time you considered moving out here to be closer to us. I worry about you all alone in that house. We could find you a nice condo nearby with access to medical care. Just think about it, okay? We love you." Arthur sat heavily on the porch step. Julia meant well, but the idea of leaving his home, his neighborhood, his garden, it felt like losing a piece of himself. This was the house where he'd raised his children, the bedroom where Margaret took her last breath. How could he say goodbye to a lifetime of memories? But Julia had a point. Since his mild heart attack, the doctor warned him to slow down, avoid strain. Some days, just the walk out to the garden left him winded. What would happen if he had another health crisis with no one around? The thought sent a chill down his spine. Sighing, Arthur tucked the letter in his pocket. He needed time to think, to weigh his options. But right now, his tomatoes needed staking, the lettuce wanted watering. In the soothing ritual of tending his plants, perhaps he'd find the clarity he sought. As he worked through the afternoon, his thoughts drifted between an uncertain future and the comforting memories of the past. He could still picture Margaret puttering in the small patch of flowers she'd claimed as her own, poring over gardening magazines for ideas and inspiration. She'd always seen so much potential in this humble plot of earth. If only she were here to see how it had bloomed. The sun began its slow descent, bathing the garden in warm, golden light. The lettuce leaves glowed vibrant green, and a few early pea pods dangled crisp and plump, almost ready to pick. Even the most stubborn weeds had surrendered to Arthur's determined efforts. With a tired but contented sigh, he gathered up his tools, ready to turn in for the evening. But as he locked the garden shed, a flicker of movement caught his eye. There, in the bed where he'd planted marigolds just last week, a tiny seedling had pushed through the soil. Its leaves were no bigger than the head of a pin, but Arthur felt his heart lift at the sight. Such a delicate thing, so full of promise. He knelt down, marveling at the intricate veins of the minuscule leaves, the hints of lively orange just waiting to unfurl. It seemed wrong somehow to abandon this little sprout, to miss seeing the bright bloom it would one day become. And with that thought, the answer crystallized in Arthur's mind. He couldn't walk away from the life he'd built, the community he loved. Like his garden, there were still seeds to be sown here, beauty waiting to blossom. He looked out over his backyard Eden, imagining what it could become. A haven where neighbors could gather, where he could pass on what he knew. A living legacy for Margaret, who'd had a special way of nurturing people just like her cherished flower beds. His knees protested a bit as he stood, brushing dirt from his hands. He felt lighter, renewed with a sense of purpose that had been missing since he'd left the classroom. Retirement, he decided, didn't have to mean retreating from the world. It could be a chance to plant something new. Mind made up, Arthur climbed the back steps, plans already taking root. He'd start by inviting Lily over to learn about gardening, to share the quiet joy he found in helping things grow. And from there, who knew what might flourish? With the sweet, earthy smell of the garden still clinging to his shirt, Arthur went inside to find a fresh sheet of stationery. He had a letter to write to Julia and a daffodil bulb to enclose as a promise of visits to come. Chapter 2. A New Hobby. The library's automatic doors whooshed open as Arthur stepped inside, his arms laden with a stack of gardening books. The musty smell of well-loved pages and the soft hum of hushed conversations enveloped him like a comforting blanket. He navigated the familiar aisles, his eyes scanning the spines until he found the shelf dedicated to all things green and growing. Setting his books on a nearby table, Arthur began to browse, his calloused fingers skimming over glossy covers depicting vibrant blooms and bountiful harvests. Titles like The Vegetable Gardener's Bible and The Beginner's Guide to Raised Bed Gardening beckoned to him, promising a wealth of knowledge waiting to be uncovered. As he reached for a particularly enticing tome on companion planting, a gentle voice interrupted his thoughts. "Well, if it isn't Arthur Donnelly. I haven't seen you in the gardening section before." Arthur turned to find Evelyn Harris, the library's recently retired head librarian, smiling warmly at him. Her silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her eyes sparkled with a mix of wisdom and mischief. "Evelyn, how lovely to see you," Arthur replied, returning her smile. "You're right. I'm a bit of a newcomer to the world of gardening, but I've found myself with more time on my hands these days, and I thought it might be a good way to keep busy." Evelyn nodded, her gaze drifting to the books Arthur had collected. Gardening is a wonderful hobby. It keeps the mind sharp and the body active. And there's nothing quite like the satisfaction of harvesting something you've grown with your own two hands. That's what I'm hoping for, Arthur agreed, his excitement growing. I've always admired Margaret's little flower patch, but I never had the time to really dig in and learn. Now, I want to do it justice, maybe even expand a bit. Well, you've certainly come to the right place, Evelyn said, gesturing to the shelves around them. These books will get you started, but don't hesitate to ask if you need any advice. I may be retired, but I still know my way around a card catalog and a garden. With a conspiratorial wink, Evelyn bid Arthur farewell and continued on her way. Arthur watched her go, feeling a spark of gratitude for her words of encouragement. It was nice to know he had an ally in this new endeavor, someone who understood the joy and purpose that could be found in tending a patch of earth. Armed with his new books and a renewed sense of determination, Arthur checked out his selections and made his way to the local nursery. The bell above the door jingled cheerfully as he entered, announcing his arrival amidst the riotous colors and heady scents of the plants that filled every nook and cranny. "Welcome to Green Thumb Nursery," a voice called out from behind a display of potted ferns. A moment later, a smiling man emerged, wiping his hands on his apron. "I'm Rashid, the owner. What can I help you with today?" Arthur returned the smile, instantly warmed by Rashid's friendly demeanor. "I'm looking to expand my vegetable garden, but I'm not quite sure where to start. I was hoping you might have some suggestions for a beginner." Rashid's eyes lit up, his passion for his work evident in the way he practically bounced on his heels. "Absolutely. Let's start with the basics. What kind of space are you working with? Sun exposure? Soil type?" As Arthur described his modest backyard plot, Rashid listened attentively, nodding along and offering insights. He guided Arthur through the nursery, pointing out plants well suited to the conditions he described: hardy tomato varieties, prolific zucchini, and fragrant herbs that would thrive in the sun-drenched bed. "Now, the key to a successful vegetable garden is good soil," Rashid explained, handing Arthur a bag of rich, dark compost. "Work this into your beds before you plant, and your veggies will thank you. And don't forget to mulch. It helps retain moisture and keep weeds at bay." Arthur nodded, mental notes clicking into place as he absorbed Rashid's advice. With each new tip and tidbit of information, he could feel his confidence growing, his initial nervousness giving way to a budding excitement. By the time he left the nursery, Arthur's trunk was filled with flats of seedlings, bags of soil and mulch, and a brand new set of gardening tools. But more than that, he left with a sense of purpose, a feeling that he was embarking on something meaningful. Back at home, Arthur wasted no time putting his newfound knowledge into practice. He spent the afternoon carefully transplanting seedlings, his hands gently coaxing each delicate root into the welcoming earth. As he worked, he found himself slipping into a meditative rhythm, his mind quieting as he focused on the simple, satisfying tasks before him. He could almost hear Margaret's voice guiding him, her gentle instructions echoing in his memory. "Tamp the soil gently around the base, Arthur. Not too tight now. They need room to stretch and grow." His heart swelled with a bittersweet mix of love and longing, the ache of her absence tempered by the comfort of carrying on her legacy in the garden. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of orange and pink, Arthur straightened up, surveying his handiwork with a satisfied smile. The newly planted rows looked full of promise, each tender shoot reaching toward the heavens with an almost palpable sense of potential. He was just about to head inside to wash up when a flash of movement caught his eye. Peering over the fence, he spotted Lily's son Max chasing a butterfly through the grass, his face alight with unbridled joy. A moment later, Lily appeared, calling out to Max to be careful. Seeing his neighbor, Arthur waved, a friendly hello already forming on his lips. Lily waved back, then paused, her gaze drifting to the freshly planted garden bed. "Wow, Arthur, your garden is really shaping up," she called out, genuine admiration in her voice. "Those tomato plants look so healthy." Arthur felt a flush of pride at her words, a warmth blooming in his chest that had nothing to do with the lingering heat of the day. "Thank you, Lily. I've been doing some reading, trying to learn as much as I can. It's a bit of a learning curve, but I'm enjoying the process." Lily smiled, her eyes softening with a hint of wistfulness. "I've always wanted to try my hand at gardening, but I never seem to find the time. Between work and Max, there's always something else that needs my attention." An idea began to take root in Arthur's mind, a seed of possibility that he couldn't quite ignore. "You know, Lily, if you're interested, I'd be happy to show you some of what I've learned. We could start small, maybe a little herb garden for your kitchen windowsill." Lily's face lit up, her smile widening into a grin. "Really? Oh, Arthur, that would be wonderful. I've always loved the idea of snipping fresh basil or rosemary right from my own little garden." "Then let's make it happen," Arthur said, his own smile mirroring hers. "Why don't you and Max come over this weekend? We can look through some of these gardening books together and come up with a plan." "It's a date," Lily agreed, her eyes sparkling with anticipation. "Thank you, Arthur. This means more to me than you know." With a final wave, Lily corralled an excited Max and headed back to their house, leaving Arthur with a warmth in his heart that had nothing to do with the sun-soaked soil beneath his feet. As he watched them go, Arthur couldn't help but marvel at the way a simple patch of earth could bring people together, forging connections and nurturing dreams in equal measure. It was a reminder that growth didn't just happen in the garden. It happened in the hearts and lives of those who tended it. With a contented sigh, Arthur gathered up his tools and made his way inside, already looking forward to the weekend and the chance to share his newfound passion with a friend. He had a feeling that this was just the beginning, that, together, they might just be able to cultivate something truly beautiful, one seed at a time. Chapter 3. The Curious Neighbor. Saturday morning dawned clear and bright, the sun's gentle rays coaxing dew-laden blades of grass to stand at attention. Arthur was already in his garden, coffee mug in hand, surveying the fruits of his labor with a critical eye. The tomato plants had grown noticeably since he'd put them in the ground, their sturdy stems reaching skyward with an almost audible stretch. He was just contemplating whether the lettuce needed thinning when the sound of a door opening and closing drew his attention. Glancing up, he saw Lily and Max making their way across the yard, a tray of muffins balanced carefully in Lily's hands. "Good morning, Arthur," Lily called out, her voice bright with excitement. "We come bearing gifts, freshly baked blueberry muffins, still warm from the oven." Arthur's stomach rumbled appreciatively as the scent of butter and berries wafted his way. "Well, isn't this a lovely surprise?" he said, grinning as Max bounded ahead, his eyes wide with curiosity. "Wow, Mr. Arthur, your garden is so big," Max exclaimed, his gaze darting from plant to plant. "Can I help you pick the vegetables when they're ready?" Arthur chuckled, reaching out to ruffle Max's hair affectionately. "Of course you can, Max. In fact, I was hoping you and your mom might like to learn a bit about gardening today. What do you say?" Max's face lit up, his excitement palpable. "Really? I want to learn everything. Can we start now?" Lily laughed, setting the tray of muffins down on the nearby patio table. Slow down, kiddo. Let's let Mr. Arthur enjoy his coffee and muffin first. Besides, I think we need to start with the basics before we get to the harvesting part. Arthur nodded, gesturing for Lily and Max to join him at the table. Your mom is right. Max gardening is a bit like baking. You have to follow the recipe and be patient. But I promise, the end result is always worth the wait. As they settled in, Arthur began to share some of what he'd learned from his books and his conversation with Rashid. He explained how different plants had different needs. Some thrived in full sun, while others preferred a bit of shade. Some needed lots of water, while others were more drought-tolerant. Lily listened attentively, her brow furrowed in concentration as she tried to absorb all the new information. I had no idea there was so much to consider, she admitted, taking a sip of her coffee. I always thought you just stuck a seed in the ground and hoped for the best. Arthur smiled, shaking his head. That's a common misconception. But the truth is, gardening is a science as much as an art. The more you understand about the plants you're working with, the better equipped you are to help them thrive. As the morning wore on, Arthur led Lily and Max through the garden, pointing out the different crops he'd planted and explaining their unique characteristics. Max was particularly fascinated by the colorful flowers Arthur had interspersed among the vegetables. Those are marigolds, Arthur explained, pointing to a cluster of bright orange blooms. They're not just pretty to look at, they also help keep pests away from the tomatoes. Max's eyes widened, his face a picture of wonder. You mean the flowers protect the vegetables? That's so cool. Lily, too, was impressed, her gaze lingering on the vibrant petals. I never knew flowers could serve a purpose beyond looking beautiful. It's like they're all working together, helping each other out. Arthur nodded, a thoughtful expression on his face. That's one of the things I love most about gardening. It's a reminder that everything in nature is connected, that we all have a role to play in the larger ecosystem. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Arthur and Lily continued to chat, swapping stories and laughing at Max's endless stream of questions. It was a revelation to see his garden through their eyes, to rediscover the magic and wonder of it all. By the time Lily and Max said their goodbyes, with promises to return soon for another lesson, Arthur felt a lightness in his heart that he hadn't experienced in a long time. It was as if, in sharing his passion with others, he had tapped into a wellspring of joy and purpose that had been lying dormant within him. As he watched Lily and Max walk back to their house, Max's hand tucked securely in his mother's, Arthur couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation for what the future might hold. He had a feeling that this was just the beginning, that, in nurturing these new friendships, he might just be planting the seeds for something truly extraordinary. With a contented sigh, Arthur turned back to his garden, ready to tackle the day's tasks with a renewed sense of energy and enthusiasm. He had a feeling that, with Lily and Max by his side, there was no limit to what they might grow, both in the garden and in their hearts. Chapter 4. The Garden Expands. The sun had barely crested the horizon when Arthur arrived at Lily's house, a rolled-up sheet of paper tucked under his arm and a sparkle of excitement in his eyes. He found her waiting on the front porch, cradling a steaming mug of coffee and looking just as eager to get started. "Good morning, Lily," Arthur called out, waving the paper in greeting. "I've been up since dawn working on these plans for your new garden. I think you're going to love what I have in mind." Lily grinned, setting her mug down and hurrying to meet him. "Good morning, Arthur. I've been thinking about this all night. I can hardly wait to see what you've come up with." Together, they unfurled the paper on Lily's porch table, revealing a detailed sketch of her backyard. Arthur had transformed the empty grass into a vibrant patchwork of raised beds, trellises, and winding paths, each element carefully placed to maximize sun exposure and create a sense of harmony and flow. "Oh, Arthur," Lily breathed, her eyes widening as she took in the intricate design. "This is beyond anything I could have imagined. It's beautiful." Arthur beamed, his chest swelling with pride and excitement. "I'm so glad you like it, Lily. I tried to incorporate all the things we've talked about, a mix of vegetables, herbs, and flowers, with plenty of space for Max to explore and learn. And see here." He pointed to a cozy corner of the sketch, where a small bench nestled beneath the shade of a flowering tree. "I thought this could be a little retreat for you, a place to relax and enjoy the fruits of your labors." Lily felt tears prick the corners of her eyes, touched by the thoughtfulness and care Arthur had poured into the design. "It's perfect, Arthur. Absolutely perfect. I can't wait to get started." With the vision firmly in place, Arthur and Lily wasted no time in gathering the necessary supplies. They made a trip to the local nursery, where Rashid greeted them with his usual warm smile and infectious enthusiasm. "Arthur, Lily, so good to see you both," he exclaimed, shaking their hands vigorously. "What brings you in today? Planning another garden expansion?" Arthur chuckled, nodding in confirmation. "You guessed it, Rashid. We're working on transforming Lily's backyard into a little slice of paradise. I was hoping you might have some suggestions for plants that would thrive in the conditions we have to work with." Rashid's eyes lit up, and he clapped his hands together eagerly. Of course, of course. Let me show you some of my favorites. You know, this reminds me of a community garden project I helped with back in my hometown. It started with just a few dedicated folks like yourselves, and before we knew it, the whole neighborhood was involved. It was a beautiful thing to see, people of all ages and backgrounds coming together to create something special. As Rashid chattered on, leading them through the nursery's lush greenhouses and pointing out various plants and their unique qualities, Lily felt a sense of kinship and inspiration blooming in her chest. She could picture it so clearly, her own little backyard haven, spilling over with life and color, a magnet for curious neighbors and new friendships. With their cart loaded down with seedlings, bags of rich compost, and an assortment of tools, Arthur and Lily made their way back to her house, ready to turn the vision into reality. They spent the morning working side by side, preparing the beds and gently tucking each tiny plant into the welcoming earth. As they labored, the conversation flowed as easily as the cool spring breeze that ruffled the leaves overhead. Lily found herself opening up to Arthur in a way she hadn't with anyone in a long time, sharing her hopes and fears for the future. "You know, Arthur," she confessed, pausing to wipe a bead of sweat from her brow, "as much as I love my job, I've always dreamed of doing something more, something that makes a real difference in the world. But with Max to think about and the bills piling up, it's hard to imagine making a change." Arthur smiled, his eyes crinkling with understanding. "Lily, I've been around long enough to know that it's never too late to pursue your dreams. Look at me. I spent 40 years teaching math, and now here I am, discovering a whole new passion in my golden years. If there's one thing gardening has taught me, it's that growth and change are always possible, no matter your age or circumstances." Lily felt a warmth blossoming in her chest, a sense of possibility taking root. "You're right, Arthur. Maybe it's time I start thinking about what I really want, what kind of future I want to cultivate for myself and for Max." As the sun climbed higher in the sky, they continued to work, their conversation interspersed with the satisfying crunch of shovels breaking earth and the gentle rustling of leaves in the breeze. But as they reached the far corner of the yard, they encountered an unexpected obstacle. Arthur murmured, frowning as his shovel struck something hard and unyielding beneath the surface. Looks like we've got some rocky soil over here. This could make it tough for the plants to take root. Lily's brow furrowed with concern, but Arthur simply chuckled, shaking his head. Don't worry, Lily. This is just a chance for us to get creative. Here, let me show you a little trick I learned from my dad. He knelt down, scooping up a handful of the stubborn soil and crumbling it between his fingers. See how compacted this is? What we need to do is amend it with some organic matter, something to help break it up and add nutrients. I've got just the thing back at my place, a compost mix I've been working on for months. We'll work it into the soil, give it some time to do its magic, and before you know it, this spot will be just as lush and fertile as the rest of the garden. Lily watched in fascination as Arthur demonstrated, marveling at the depth of his knowledge and the ease with which he navigated challenges. With his guidance, they spent the next hour carefully working the compost into the soil, transforming the hard, unyielding earth into something rich and full of potential. As they stepped back to admire their handiwork, Lily felt a rush of pride and accomplishment. What had started as a barren patch of grass was now a thriving oasis, filled with the promise of future growth and abundance. But the transformation wasn't limited to the garden alone. Over the next few days, as word of their project spread throughout the neighborhood, Lily began to notice a shift in the attitudes and interactions of those around her. Sophie, the high school art teacher from down the street, stopped by one afternoon to admire the progress and offer her help with the planting. As she knelt beside Lily, gently patting the soil around a delicate seedling, she shared her own dreams of incorporating more nature-inspired elements into her art classes. I've always believed that creativity and self-expression are essential to a child's development, Sophie mused, brushing a stray curl from her face. But lately, I've been feeling like something's missing, like my students need a deeper connection to the world around them. Seeing what you and Arthur have created here, it's given me so many ideas for how I can bring that sense of wonder and appreciation into the classroom. Lily nodded, a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. I know what you mean, Sophie. Since I started gardening with Arthur, I've noticed a change in Max, too. He's more curious, more engaged with the world around him. It's like the garden has opened up a whole new way of learning and exploring for him. As the two women chatted, trading ideas and stories, Lily felt a sense of connection and community that she hadn't experienced in years. It was as if the garden had become a catalyst, a common ground that brought people together and fostered new relationships and understandings. And it wasn't just Sophie. Over the next few weeks, as the garden continued to thrive and expand, Lily found herself engaging in more and more conversations with her neighbors, sharing tips and stories over the lush beds of vegetables and vibrant blooms. There was Evelyn, the retired librarian, who delighted in sharing her extensive knowledge of herbs and their medicinal properties, and Rashid, who dropped by with a sampling of his own homegrown teas and spices, eager to swap recipes and techniques. Even Jake, the quiet young writer who had always seemed lost in his own world, found himself drawn to the garden, offering to help with the weeding and pruning in exchange for a quiet spot to sit and write, surrounded by the beauty and tranquility of the flourishing plants. As Arthur watched this transformation unfold, his heart swelled with a sense of pride and purpose. He had always known that gardening had the power to change lives, to bring people together and foster a sense of connection and belonging. But seeing it happen in real time, witnessing the way his little patch of earth had become a catalyst for community and growth, it was more than he had ever dreamed possible. One evening, as he and Lily sat together on the bench beneath the flowering tree, surveying the fruits of their labors, Arthur felt a sudden rush of inspiration. He turned to Lily, his eyes sparkling with excitement. "Lily," he said, his voice barely containing his enthusiasm, "I've been thinking, what if we took this to the next level? What if we started a neighborhood gardening club, a place where everyone could come together to learn and grow and share in the joy of working with the earth?" Lily's eyes widened, a slow smile spreading across her face as the idea took root. "Arthur, that's brilliant. We could have regular meetings, workshops, even community events like potlucks and seed swaps. It would be a way to bring people together, to create something truly special." Arthur nodded, his mind already racing with possibilities. "Exactly. And it wouldn't just be about the gardening itself, but about the connections and relationships that grow from it. We could create a real sense of belonging, of shared purpose and pride in our little corner of the world." As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the garden and the two friends who had brought it to life, Lily reached out and squeezed Arthur's hand, her eyes shining with gratitude and excitement. "Let's do it, Arthur," she said, her voice filled with conviction. "Let's create something beautiful, something that will bring people together and make a real difference in our community. Together, I believe we can grow something truly extraordinary." And with those words, spoken in the fading light of a perfect spring evening, the seed of an idea was planted, a vision of a future filled with growth, connection, and the simple, profound joy of nurturing life in all its forms. As Arthur and Lily sat together, dreaming and planning beneath the stars, they knew that this was just the beginning, that the real magic was still to come, waiting to burst forth like a flower from the rich, fertile soil of their shared passion and dedication. In that moment, the garden seemed to hum with a new energy, a sense of anticipation and possibility that hung in the air like the sweet fragrance of blooming roses. And as the first fireflies of the season began to flicker and dance among the leaves, Arthur and Lily knew that they were on the cusp of something truly special, a journey of growth and discovery that would change not just their own lives, but the lives of everyone around them, one seed at a time. Chapter 5. The Block Party. The morning of the block party dawned bright and clear, the sun's golden rays filtering through the leafy canopy of Arthur's backyard. He surveyed the scene with a sense of quiet satisfaction, taking in the neatly mowed lawn, the colorful streamers fluttering in the breeze, and the long tables laden with carefully arranged platters and bowls. Beside him, Lily buzzed with excitement, her eyes sparkling as she made last-minute adjustments to the centerpieces. Delicate bouquets of zinnias, cosmos, and black-eyed Susans, all plucked from her own thriving garden. "Can you believe it, Arthur?" she exclaimed, stepping back to admire her handiwork. "Just a few months ago, this was all just a dream. And now look at us, bringing the whole neighborhood together to celebrate what we've grown." Arthur smiled, his heart swelling with pride and gratitude. "It's amazing what a little hard work and a lot of love can do," he mused, reaching out to straighten a wayward streamer. "I never imagined that a few tomato plants could lead to all this." As they worked, the sound of laughter and chatter began to fill the air, as neighbors arrived bearing dishes of their own to share. There was Evelyn, her silver hair caught up in a neat bun, carrying a tray of her famous lavender shortbread cookies. Rashid followed close behind, his arms laden with jars of homemade chutney and pickled vegetables, the vibrant colors gleaming in the sunlight. Even Jake, the shy young writer, emerged from his parents' house with a nervous smile, a bowl of fresh salsa clutched in his hands. "I used the tomatoes and peppers from my own garden," he confided to Arthur, his voice tinged with pride. "I never thought I'd be able to grow anything, but thanks to you and Lily, Well, I guess I'm learning all sorts of new things. As the party got underway, the backyard hummed with the sounds of a community coming together. Children darted between the tables, their faces sticky with watermelon juice and their hands full of wildflowers picked from the nearby fields. Adults clustered in small groups, swapping recipes and gardening tips, their faces alight with the joy of shared passions and newfound friendships. Amidst the hubbub, Arthur found himself in conversation with a newcomer to the neighborhood, Sophie Torres, the high school art teacher who had recently moved in with her family. Her eyes were bright with curiosity as she took in the scene around her gaze lingering on the vibrant blooms and verdant foliage that seemed to fill every corner of the yard. "I have to say, Arthur," she began, her voice warm with admiration, "I've never seen a community quite like this before. The way everyone here seems to have embraced gardening, the way it's brought people together, it's truly inspiring." Arthur felt a flush of pleasure at her words, his eyes crinkling at the corners as he smiled. "It's been a joy to watch it all unfold," he confessed, his gaze drifting to where Lily stood, laughing with a group of neighbors as she showed off a basket of ripe, juicy tomatoes. "Lily and I may have planted the first seeds, but it's the community that's really made it all blossom." Sophie nodded, her own smile widening as she watched the scene. "You know, as an art teacher, I'm always looking for ways to bring more beauty and creativity into the world. And seeing what you've all created here, it's given me so many ideas for how I can incorporate nature into my own work, and maybe even inspire my students to do the same." Arthur's eyes lit up at the mention of Sophie's work, his mind already spinning with possibilities. "You know, I bet there are all sorts of ways we could collaborate," he mused, his voice taking on a note of excitement. "Imagine what we could create if we brought together the worlds of art and gardening. The colors, the textures, the way they both have the power to transform and inspire." Sophie's face glowed with enthusiasm, her hands already sketching shapes in the air as she spoke. "Oh, I can picture it now. A community art project that incorporates elements from everyone's gardens, a living sculpture that changes with the seasons. We could even have workshops where people learn to create their own nature-inspired pieces using materials they've grown themselves." As they spoke, their ideas tumbling out in a rush of excitement, Arthur felt a thrill of possibility running through him. It was a reminder of the power of connection, of the way that one passion could spark another, creating a ripple effect of inspiration and growth. As the afternoon wore on, the party continued in full swing, the air filled with the mingled scents of fresh produce and sizzling hamburgers, the sounds of laughter and music drifting on the warm summer breeze. Arthur found himself in high demand, as neighbor after neighbor approached him to offer their thanks and praise for the work he and Lily had done. Some shared stories of their own gardening triumphs and challenges, while others simply wanted to express their gratitude for the sense of community and purpose that had blossomed alongside the flowers and vegetables. "You know, Arthur," Rashid said, clapping a hand on the older man's shoulder, "when you first started puttering around in that garden of yours, I have to admit, I didn't quite see the point. But now, looking around at all this," he gestured to the bustling scene, his face splitting into a wide grin, "I get it. You've created something truly special here, something that goes way beyond just growing a few plants." Arthur felt a lump form in his throat, his eyes misting over as he took in the sincere words of his neighbor and friend. "Thank you, Rashid," he managed, his voice rough with emotion. "That means more to me than you know." As the sun began to sink lower in the sky, painting the world in shades of gold and amber, Arthur found himself in a quiet moment with Lily, the two of them standing side by side as they surveyed the joyful scene before them. "You know," Lily said softly, her eyes shining with unshed tears, "when I first started learning from you, I thought it was just about the gardening. But now I realize it was about so much more than that. It was about finding my own strength, my own sense of purpose. And it was about being part of something bigger, something that has the power to change lives and bring people together." Arthur nodded, his own eyes glistening as he reached out to squeeze Lily's hand. "I feel the same way," he confessed, his voice thick with emotion. "This garden, this community, it's given me a reason to keep growing, to keep learning and sharing and connecting with others. And I can't help but feel like Margaret is smiling down on us, knowing that her love for gardening has bloomed into something so beautiful and meaningful." For a moment, they stood in silence, their hearts full to bursting with the joy and gratitude of the day. And then, with a deep breath and a shared smile, they turned back to the party, ready to embrace whatever new adventures and opportunities the future might hold. As the block party began to wind down and neighbors started to say their goodbyes, Arthur found himself at the center of a small crowd. All eyes turned to him expectantly. He cleared his throat, suddenly feeling a flutter of nerves in his stomach as he realized what he was about to do. "Friends," he began, his voice carrying across the yard, "I want to thank you all for coming today, for sharing in the joy and the bounty of what we've created here. Seeing the way this community has come together, the way we've all grown and learned from each other, it's been one of the greatest privileges of my life." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the sea of smiling faces, taking in the nods of agreement and the murmurs of appreciation. "And it's gotten me thinking," he continued, his voice growing stronger with each word, "about how we can keep this momentum going, how we can continue to nurture and support each other in our love for gardening and for the earth that sustains us all." Lily stepped forward, her eyes sparkling with excitement as she took Arthur's hand in hers. "What Arthur is trying to say," she said, her voice ringing out clear and strong, "is that we have an idea for a neighborhood gardening club, a place where we can come together to learn and grow and share our passion with each other." A ripple of excitement ran through the crowd, heads nodding and voices rising in a chorus of approval. Sophie, her face alight with enthusiasm, spoke up from the back of the group. "That sounds amazing," she exclaimed, her hands clasped together in delight. "I would love to be a part of something like that, to have a chance to learn from all of you, and to share my own ideas for incorporating nature into art." Rashid chimed in, his voice booming with enthusiasm. "Count me in, too. I've been wanting to learn more about growing my own herbs and spices, and I can't think of a better way to do it than with all of you by my side." One by one, neighbors stepped forward to offer their support and their ideas, their faces glowing with the promise of new adventures and shared joys. Arthur felt his heart swell with pride and gratitude, his eyes misting over as he realized the true scope of what he and Lily had set in motion. "Thank you," he said simply, his voice rough with emotion. "Thank you all for believing in this, for being willing to take a chance on something new and wonderful. I can't wait to see where this journey takes us and to grow alongside each and every one of you." As the last of the neighbors trickled out of the yard, their arms laden with leftover food and bouquets of freshly cut flowers, Arthur and Lily found themselves alone once more, the quiet of the evening settling around them like a comforting blanket. "We did it," Lily whispered, her face radiant with joy and exhaustion. "We really did it, Arthur. We brought this community together in a way that I never could have imagined." Arthur nodded, His own face split wide with a grin that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside him. "We did," he agreed, his voice soft with wonder. "And it's only the beginning, Lily. I can feel it in my bones, the way I feel the change of seasons in the air. Something beautiful is taking root here, something that will grow and thrive and bear fruit for years to come." Lily leaned her head on Arthur's shoulder, her eyes drifting closed as she savored the moment. "I'm so grateful," she murmured, her voice heavy with contentment. "Grateful for you, for this garden, for everything that has led us to this moment. I feel like I'm exactly where I'm meant to be, doing exactly what I'm meant to do." Arthur wrapped an arm around her shoulders, his own heart full to bursting with the joy and meaning of it all. "Me too, Lily," he said softly, his eyes turning to the sky above, where the first stars of the evening were just beginning to wink into view. "Me too." And there they stayed, two friends, two kindred spirits, their lives forever entwined by the simple act of planting a seed and watching it grow. The future stretched out before them, rich with promise and possibility, and they knew that whatever challenges and triumphs lay ahead, they would face them together, rooted in the strength and resilience of the community they had helped to build. As the last light of day faded from the sky and the crickets began their nightly serenade, Arthur and Lily made their way inside, their hearts full and their minds already spinning with plans for the days and weeks to come. The block party had been a triumph, a celebration of all they had accomplished and all that was yet to be. But it was only the beginning, a jumping-off point for a journey that would take them to places they had never dreamed possible. With a last glance at the garden that had started it all, Arthur switched off the porch light and headed inside, ready to rest and recharge for the new adventures that awaited them. The seeds had been planted, the roots had taken hold, and now it was time to watch the garden grow, to tend and nurture it with all the love and care they could muster. And grow it would, in ways both big and small, touching lives and hearts in ways they could scarcely imagine. For in the end, that was the true magic of the garden. Not just the beauty and bounty it produced, but the way it brought people together, creating a tapestry of connection and care that would endure long after the last tomato had been picked and the last flower had faded. With a smile on his face and a song in his heart, Arthur closed his eyes and drifted off to sleep, dreaming of all the joys and wonders that the future held. And in his dreams, he saw the garden of his life in full bloom, a riot of color and life that stretched as far as the eye could see, nurtured by the love and dedication of the community he had helped to grow. Chapter 6. The Gardening Club. The sun had barely crested the horizon when Arthur stepped out into his backyard, a tray of seedlings cradled in his arms and a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Today was the day he had been looking forward to for weeks, the first official meeting of the neighborhood gardening club. As he set about arranging chairs and laying out supplies on the weathered picnic table, Arthur couldn't help but marvel at how far he had come in such a short time. Just a few months ago, he had been a man adrift, searching for purpose in the wake of his wife's passing and his retirement from teaching. But now, as he surveyed the small group of neighbors gathering in his yard, their faces alight with enthusiasm and curiosity, he felt a sense of belonging and excitement that he hadn't experienced in years. "Good morning, everyone," Arthur called out, his voice carrying across the yard. "Welcome to the first meeting of the Green Thumbs Gardening Club. I'm so glad you all could make it." A chorus of greetings and smiles met his words, as the group of around a dozen neighbors settled into their seats. There was Lily, of course, her face glowing with pride as she helped Max arrange a tray of homemade muffins on the table. Beside her sat Sophie and Luis, deep in conversation with Rashid about the medicinal properties of herbs. And there, at the back of the group, was Jake, the young writer, his notebook already open and his pen poised to capture the wisdom of the day. As Arthur took his place at the head of the table, he felt a flutter of nerves in his stomach. Leading a group was a new experience for him, and he wanted to make sure he did it right. But as he looked out at the faces of his neighbors, their eyes shining with the same love for the earth that had sustained him through his darkest days, he felt his anxiety melt away, replaced by a sense of purpose and excitement. I thought we might start today by talking a bit about soil health, Arthur began, his voice taking on the confident, measured tone of a seasoned teacher. After all, the foundation of any successful garden is the quality of the earth beneath our feet. And with that, he launched into a lively discussion of composting, nutrient balance, and the importance of nurturing the delicate ecosystem of the soil. The group listened attentively, peppering him with questions and sharing their own experiences with trial and error in their gardens. As the morning wore on, the conversation flowed easily, drifting from practical tips on pest control to philosophical musings on the nature of growth and change. Arthur found himself marveling at the depth of knowledge and passion in the group, the way each person brought their own unique perspective and skills to the table. There was Evelyn, the retired librarian, who regaled them with stories of the victory gardens of her youth, and the way that growing food had brought communities together during times of scarcity and war. And there was Rashid, the pharmacist, who spoke with quiet intensity about the healing power of plants, and his dreams of one day opening a community garden focused on medicinal herbs. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Arthur glanced at his watch, realizing that they had been talking for nearly 2 hours. "I don't know about all of you," he said with a grin, "but I'm feeling inspired to get my hands dirty. What do you say we do a little planting before we wrap up for the day?" The group nodded eagerly, and Arthur led them over to a corner of the yard where he had prepared a raised bed for a communal herb garden. He handed out gloves and trowels, demonstrating the proper way to loosen the soil and create small divots for the seedlings. As they worked, the conversation turned to the future of the club and the potential for expanding their efforts beyond their own backyards. "What if we started a seed library?" Sophie suggested, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "We could collect and share seeds from our own plants, and maybe even partner with the local schools to teach kids about gardening and sustainability." Lily nodded enthusiastically, her hands still busy patting soil around a delicate basil seedling. "I love that idea, Sophie. And maybe we could organize some workshops or classes, too. I know I still have so much to learn, and I bet there are others in the neighborhood who would love to get involved." Arthur felt his heart swell with pride as he listened to their ideas, marveling at the way a simple love of gardening had already begun to knit this diverse group of neighbors into a true community. He was just about to voice his own thoughts when the shrill ring of his phone interrupted the conversation. Excusing himself, Arthur stepped away to take the call, his brow furrowing as he listened to the concerned voice on the other end of the line. It was Mrs. Nguyen, an elderly Vietnamese woman who lived a few streets over, and who had been one of the first to take an interest in the gardening club. "Mr. Arthur," she said, her voice tight with worry, "I hate to bother you, but I noticed some strange spots on my tomato leaves this morning. I'm afraid it might be blight. I don't want it to spread to the other plants. Can you help?" Arthur felt a pang of concern, his mind already racing with the possibilities. Tomato blight was a serious problem, and one that could quickly decimate a whole crop if left unchecked. He assured Mrs. Nguyen that he would stop by later that day to take a look, his mind already formulating a plan of action. As he hung up the phone and turned back to the group, Arthur could see the curiosity and concern on their faces. "Is everything okay?" Lily asked, her brow furrowed with worry. Arthur sighed. running a hand through his hair. "It looks like we might have a case of tomato blight on our hands," he explained, watching as a ripple of concern passed through the group. "But don't worry, we'll figure it out together. In the meantime, let's all keep a close eye on our own plants and report back if we notice any signs of trouble." The group nodded solemnly, the levity of the moment tempered by the realization that even the most well-tended garden was not immune to the challenges of nature. But as Arthur looked around at the determined faces of his neighbors, he felt a surge of hope and resilience. They would face this challenge together, just as they had faced so many others. As the meeting began to wind down and the group started to disperse, Arthur found himself lingering in the garden, his mind turning over the events of the morning. He thought about how much he had learned from his neighbors and how much more there was still to discover. He thought about the way the club had given him a renewed sense of purpose, a way to share his knowledge and his passion with others. But he also thought about the challenges that lay ahead, the inevitable setbacks and struggles that came with nurturing any living thing. He knew that there would be times when the club would be tested, when they would have to dig deep and find the strength to persevere. And yet, as he looked out over the garden that had started it all, the lush green leaves and vibrant blooms that had sprung from the tiniest of seeds, he couldn't help but feel a sense of hope and wonder. The garden was a testament to the power of growth, to the way that even the most barren soil could be transformed with patience, care, and a little bit of love. With a smile on his face and a renewed sense of purpose in his heart, Arthur turned back to the house, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. He knew that he was not alone, that he had a community of like-minded souls standing beside him, ready to weather any storm. Over the next few weeks, the gardening club continued to meet regularly, each gathering bringing new insights, new challenges, and new opportunities for growth. Arthur watched with pride as his neighbors began to implement the lessons they had learned, their own gardens blooming with newfound vitality and color. He saw the way that Sophie's art began to take on a new depth and texture, her canvases filled with the rich hues of the earth and the delicate petals of the flowers she had grown herself. He watched as Lily patiently taught Max about the importance of pollinators, the little boy's eyes wide with wonder as he watched a bumblebee dance from flower to flower. And he saw the way that the club was beginning to have an impact beyond just their own little corner of the world. Word of their efforts had begun to spread, and soon Arthur was fielding calls and emails from neighboring communities, all eager to learn from the Green Thumbs and start their own gardening initiatives. But even as the club grew and evolved, Arthur never lost sight of the simple joys that had first drawn him to the garden. The feel of the sun on his face, the rich scent of the earth, the quiet satisfaction of watching a tiny seed sprout and grow. He knew that there would be challenges ahead, that the blight that had struck Mrs. Nguyen's tomatoes was just one of many obstacles they would face. But he also knew that they would face them together, armed with the knowledge and the passion that had brought them all together in the first place. And so, as the days grew longer and the gardens continued to thrive, Arthur found himself filled with a sense of gratitude and wonder. He had started out seeking only to fill the empty hours of his retirement, to find a way to pass the time in the wake of his wife's passing. But what he had found was so much more: a community, a purpose, a way to make the world a little bit brighter, one seed at a time. As he stood in his garden one evening, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Arthur couldn't help but smile. The tomato plants were heavy with fruit, the lettuce was crisp and green, and the air was filled with the gentle hum of bees and the laughter of children playing in the yard next door. It was a moment of perfect contentment, a reminder of the beauty and the resilience of the natural world. And as Arthur breathed in the sweet, earthy scent of the garden, He knew that he was exactly where he was meant to be. The weeks turned into months, and the gardening club continued to thrive. Each meeting brought new faces, new ideas, and new opportunities for growth and connection. And with each passing day, Arthur could see the impact that their efforts were having on the community around them. He saw it in the way that the local schools had begun to incorporate gardening into their curricula, with students eagerly tending to their own little plots of earth. He saw it in the way that the neighborhood farmers market had expanded to include a section for backyard growers, with club members proudly displaying their harvests alongside the professional farmers. And he saw it in the way that his own life had been transformed, the once quiet hours of his retirement now filled with purpose, passion, and the joyful company of his fellow gardeners. But even as the club celebrated its successes, Arthur knew that they could not rest on their laurels. There was always more to learn, more to grow, and more challenges to overcome. One day, as he was tending to his own garden, Arthur received a phone call from Lily. Her voice was tight with worry as she explained that a sudden heat wave had struck, and that her carefully tended seedlings were wilting in the scorching sun. Without hesitation, Arthur sprang into action. He put out a call to the other club members, asking for their help and expertise. Within hours, a small army of gardeners had descended upon Lily's yard, armed with shade cloths, watering cans, and a determination to save her delicate young plants. As they worked together in the sweltering heat, Arthur couldn't help but marvel at the way that the club had come together, united in their desire to help one of their own. It was a testament to the power of community, to the way that even the most daunting challenges could be overcome with teamwork and a shared sense of purpose. In the end, Lily's garden survived the heat wave, thanks to the tireless efforts of her fellow club members. And as they stood together in the cool of the evening, admiring the resilient little seedlings that had weathered the storm, Arthur felt a sense of pride and gratitude wash over him. This was what the club was all about, he realized, not just growing plants, but growing people. It was about nurturing the seeds of kindness, compassion, and connection that lay dormant in every heart, waiting for the right conditions to sprout and thrive. As the summer wore on and the gardens continued to flourish, Arthur found himself spending more and more time in quiet reflection, marveling at the way that his life had been transformed by a simple patch of earth and a handful of seeds. He thought back to those early days after Margaret's passing, when the world had seemed so empty and so devoid of meaning. He remembered the way that he had sought solace in the quiet rhythms of the garden, the way that each tiny seedling had seemed like a promise of hope and renewal. And now, as he looked out over the vibrant tapestry of his neighborhood, each yard bursting with color and life, he realized that the garden had given him so much more than he had ever dreamed possible. It had given him a community, a family of sorts, bound together by their shared love of the earth and their desire to make the world a little bit brighter. It had given him a sense of purpose, a way to share his knowledge and his passion with others, to leave a legacy that would endure long after he was gone. And perhaps most importantly, it had given him a renewed sense of hope, a belief in the power of growth and change, even in the darkest of times. As he sat in his garden one evening, the sky above him a riot of stars, Arthur couldn't help but feel a sense of peace wash over him. He knew that there would be more challenges ahead, more obstacles to overcome, and more lessons to learn. But he also knew that he would not face them alone. He had his garden, his community, and the unshakable belief that, with patience and care, even the tiniest seed could grow into something beautiful and strong. With a smile on his face and a song in his heart, Arthur rose from his seat and made his way back inside, ready to face whatever the future might hold. He had planted the seeds of change, and now it was time to watch them grow, one day at a time. Chapter 7. Growing Pains. The sun beat down mercilessly on the quiet suburban street, the air heavy and thick with the promise of another scorching day. In his backyard, Arthur wiped the sweat from his brow, surveying the once lush garden that now wilted under the relentless heat. The tomato plants drooped, their leaves curling inward as if to protect themselves from the blistering rays. The squash and zucchini, so robust just a week ago, now lay limp and lifeless, their fruit shriveled and misshapen. Even the hardy herbs seemed to be holding their breath, waiting for a reprieve that seemed increasingly unlikely. Arthur sighed, his heart heavy with worry. He had seen heat waves before, but never one quite like this. The drought had settled over the neighborhood like a suffocating blanket, turning once vibrant gardens into parched wastelands. He thought of his neighbors, of the fledgling gardeners who had taken up the hobby with such enthusiasm under his guidance. How were their plants faring in this unforgiving weather? The question gnawed at him as he made his way back inside, the cool air of the house a welcome relief from the oppressive heat. Later that evening, as the gardening club gathered in Arthur's backyard for their weekly meeting, the mood was somber. The usual chatter and laughter were replaced by worried glances and murmured concerns, as members took stock of the damage the drought had wrought. Lily was the first to speak, her voice tight with concern. "My tomatoes are in bad shape," she confessed, her hands twisting in her lap. "The leaves are all wilted and brown, and I haven't seen a single new fruit in days. I don't know what to do." Nods of agreement rippled through the group, as others chimed in with their own tales of struggling plants and dwindling harvests. Sophie held up a shriveled zucchini, its skin mottled and dry. "I've been watering twice a day, but it doesn't seem to make a difference," she said, her brow furrowed with worry. Arthur listened intently, his mind racing with possible solutions. He had faced droughts before, but never with so many gardens depending on his guidance. He could feel the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders, a mantle he had never asked for but couldn't bring himself to shrug off. "Okay, let's think this through," he said at last, his voice calm and measured. "The first thing we need to do is prioritize. We can't save every plant, but we can focus on the ones that have the best chance of surviving." He went on to outline a plan, his years of experience guiding his words. They would need to water deeply and less frequently to encourage the roots to grow deeper in search of moisture. They would need to mulch heavily to help the soil retain what little water it had. And they would need to provide shade for the most vulnerable plants to protect them from the worst of the sun's rays. As he spoke, Arthur could see the worry on his neighbors' faces slowly give way to determination. They nodded along, asking questions and offering suggestions of their own. Slowly but surely, a sense of purpose began to take hold, a glimmer of hope in the face of overwhelming odds. "We can do this," Lily said at last, her voice ringing with conviction. "We've come too far to let a little heat wave stop us now. We'll work together, just like we always have. And we'll get through this, one day at a time." Murmurs of agreement filled the air as the club members began to disperse, each with a renewed sense of purpose and a plan of action. Arthur watched them go, his heart swelling with pride and affection. They were more than just neighbors now, he realized. They were a community, bound together by their love of the earth and their determination to see it thrive. Over the next few days, the neighborhood sprang into action, united in their efforts to save their precious gardens. Early each morning, before the heat of the day set in, Arthur made his rounds, checking in on each garden and offering advice and encouragement where needed. He showed Lily how to rig up a simple drip irrigation system, using old milk jugs and a length of hose to deliver water directly to the roots of her plants. He helped Sophie construct makeshift shade cloths out of old bed sheets and bamboo stakes to shield her delicate lettuces from the scorching sun. And he worked side by side with Max, Lily's young son, to spread a thick layer of mulch around the base of each plant, the boy's small hands working tirelessly to help save the garden he had come to love. As the days wore on and the heat showed no signs of abating, Arthur could feel the toll it was taking on him, both physically and emotionally. His muscles ached from long hours spent hauling water and digging in the unyielding earth, and his mind was weary from the constant worry and stress. But he pushed on, driven by a sense of duty and a deep, abiding love for the plants that had become his lifeline. He knew that every drop of water, every ounce of effort, was a small act of defiance against the unrelenting drought, a way of saying, "We will not be beaten, we will not give up." And slowly but surely, his efforts began to pay off. The tomato plants, once withered and dry, began to perk up, their leaves unfurling to catch the meager rays of sunlight that filtered through the shade cloths. The herbs, so fragile and delicate, began to send out new shoots, their fragrance once again filling the air with the promise of life. Even Lily's garden, which had been hit the hardest by the drought, began to show signs of recovery. The zucchini plants, which had seemed all but lost, suddenly burst forth with new growth, their leaves a vibrant green against the parched earth. As the club members gathered once again in Arthur's backyard, their faces alight with cautious optimism, he could feel a sense of pride and accomplishment washing over him. They had done it, he realized. They had weathered the worst of the storm and come out the other side stronger and more united than ever. But even as they celebrated their small victories, Arthur knew that the real test was still to come. The drought was far from over, and there would be more challenges ahead, more obstacles to overcome. They would need to be vigilant, to adapt and innovate and support each other through whatever lay ahead. As the sun began to set and the gathering drew to a close, Arthur found himself seeking out the quiet companionship of Evelyn, the retired librarian who had become a trusted confidant and friend. They sat together on the porch swing, watching as the last of the club members made their way home, their voices carrying on the still, heavy air. "You've done an amazing thing here, Arthur," Evelyn said softly, her hand resting gently on his arm. "You've given these people hope, a reason to keep going even when things seem impossible." "That's a rare gift," Arthur sighed, leaning back against the cushions and closing his eyes. "I don't know, Evelyn," he confessed, his voice heavy with doubt. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm really cut out for this, if I have what it takes to lead them through something like this. What if I let them down? What if I fail?" Evelyn was quiet for a moment, her gaze distant and thoughtful. "You know," she said at last, "when I was a young girl, my mother used to tell me a story about a tiny acorn, no bigger than the tip of your finger. That little acorn," she said, "had the power to grow into a mighty oak tree, a tree that could weather any storm and provide shelter and sustenance for generations to come." She turned to Arthur, her eyes shining with wisdom and compassion. "You, my dear friend, are like that acorn. You may feel small and insignificant at times, but inside you is the potential for greatness, the power to nurture and grow and make a difference in the world. And just like that acorn, you have the strength to weather any storm, to adapt and thrive no matter what life throws your way." Arthur felt a lump forming in his throat, his eyes stinging with unshed tears. He had never thought of himself as particularly strong or resilient, but hearing Evelyn's words, He could feel a flicker of something deep inside him, a tiny spark of hope and determination. "Thank you, Evelyn," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "I needed to hear that, more than you know." Evelyn smiled, patting his hand gently. "Anytime, my friend, anytime." As the days turned into weeks and the heat wave showed no signs of abating, Arthur and his neighbors continued to work tirelessly to keep their gardens alive. They met early each morning, before the sun had a chance to bake the earth into submission, to water and tend and coax their plants back from the brink. They shared their successes and their failures, their hopes and their fears. They celebrated each new shoot and blossom as if it were a precious gift, a small miracle in the face of overwhelming odds. And slowly but surely, their efforts began to pay off. The gardens, once withered and lifeless, began to show signs of resilience and renewal. The tomato plants grew heavy with fruit, their skins blushing red in the relentless sun. The squash and zucchini, so delicate and prone to wilting, began to send out new runners, their leaves a defiant green against the parched earth. Even the herbs, so fragile and quick to succumb to the heat, began to thrive under the careful ministrations of their dedicated caretakers. Basil and oregano, thyme and rosemary. Their fragrance once again filled the air, a heady reminder of the abundance that lay just beneath the surface. As the worst of the heat wave began to subside and the first hints of cooler weather appeared on the horizon, Arthur found himself marveling at the transformation that had taken place, not just in the gardens, but in the community itself. Where once there had been isolation and disconnection, there was now a sense of unity and purpose. Neighbors who had barely spoken before now greeted each other with warm smiles and friendly waves, their shared struggles and triumphs binding them together in ways that went far beyond mere proximity. And at the center of it all was the garden, the tiny patch of earth that had started it all. It had been a catalyst for change, a spark that had ignited a flame of community and connection that now burned bright and strong. As Arthur made his way through the neighborhood one evening, the setting sun casting a golden glow over the quiet streets, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and gratitude wash over him. They had done it, he realized. They had weathered the storm and come out the other side stronger and more resilient than ever. But even as he celebrated their hard-won victories, Arthur knew that the real work was just beginning. The drought had been a test, a challenge that had pushed them all to their limits and beyond. But it had also been a reminder of the power of community, of the incredible things that could be achieved when people came together in common purpose. As he turned the corner onto his own street, Arthur was surprised to see a small crowd gathered outside his house, their faces alight with excitement and anticipation. Lily was there, and Sophie and Luis, and even little Max, bouncing on his toes with barely contained energy. "What's all this?" Arthur asked, a bemused smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Lily stepped forward, her eyes shining with pride and affection. "We wanted to surprise you," she said, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. "To thank you for everything you've done for us, for the community. We couldn't have gotten through this without you, Arthur. You've been our rock, our guide, our inspiration." She gestured to the crowd, to the faces of friends and neighbors who had become like family. "We all pitched in," she continued, "to put together a little something, to show you how much you mean to us." And with that, she stepped aside, revealing a small, neatly wrapped package, tied with a simple green ribbon. Arthur took it gingerly, his hands shaking slightly as he tore open the paper to reveal a small, leather-bound book. "It's a gardening journal," Sophie explained, her voice soft and filled with warmth. "We all contributed, writing down our favorite memories and moments from the past few months. The triumphs and the struggles, the laughter and the tears. It's a reminder of what we've been through and what we've accomplished together. Arthur felt his throat tighten with emotion as he flipped through the pages, each one filled with the heartfelt words and colorful drawings of his neighbors and friends. There were stories of first harvests and hard-won battles against pests and disease, of shared meals and quiet moments of connection in the garden. And on the last page, in Lily's neat, precise handwriting, was a simple message that took his breath away. To Arthur, our dear friend and mentor, thank you for planting the seeds of community and for nurturing them with your love and wisdom. We are forever grateful. As the tears began to flow freely down his weathered cheeks, Arthur looked up at the faces of his neighbors, his friends, his family. And in that moment, he knew that he had found something far greater than a simple hobby or pastime. He had found a purpose, a calling, a way to make a difference in the world, one small seed at a time. And as the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars began to appear in the velvet sky, Arthur felt a sense of peace and contentment wash over him. The road ahead would not be easy, he knew. There would be more challenges to face, more obstacles to overcome. But he also knew that he would not face them alone. He had his garden, his community, his acorn of strength and resilience to guide him through whatever lay ahead. With a final, grateful glance at the precious journal in his hands, Arthur turned to his neighbors, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you," he said simply, the words feeling inadequate to express the depth of his gratitude and love. "Thank you for everything." And as the small crowd began to disperse, their voices lifting in laughter and conversation, Arthur knew that he was exactly where he was meant to be. The garden had brought them together, had given them a common purpose and a shared sense of beauty and wonder. And together, they would continue to grow, to thrive, to create something lasting and meaningful, one small miracle at a time. The drought had been a test of their strength and resilience, a crucible that had forged them into something greater than the sum of their parts. And as Arthur made his way back to his own little patch of earth, his heart full and his spirit renewed, he knew that they had passed with flying colors. The garden would continue to grow and change, to evolve and adapt to whatever challenges lay ahead. But at its heart, it would always be a symbol of the incredible power of community, of the ways in which even the smallest acts of kindness and compassion could take root and flourish, transforming the world in ways both big and small. And for Arthur, that was more than enough. It was everything. Chapter 8. The Harvest Festival. The crisp autumn air was alive with excitement as the residents of the quiet suburban neighborhood gathered in the community center, their arms laden with dishes and platters filled to the brim with the vibrant colors and tantalizing aromas of their homegrown bounty. Arthur stood at the entrance, greeting each arrival with a warm smile and a hearty handshake, his eyes sparkling with pride and joy. Just a few short months ago, the idea of a neighborhood harvest festival had seemed like an impossible dream, a far-off vision in the midst of the scorching heat and relentless drought that had threatened to destroy all they had worked so hard to build. But now, as he watched his neighbors file in, their faces alight with laughter and conversation, he couldn't help but marvel at the resilience and determination that had brought them to this moment. They had weathered the storm together, had banded together in the face of adversity, and had emerged stronger and more united than ever before. As the last of the guests trickled in and the doors were closed behind them, Arthur made his way to the center of the room, where a long table had been set up to showcase the fruits of their labors. His breath caught in his throat as he took in the sight before him, a veritable feast of colors, textures, and flavors, each dish a testament to the love and care that had gone into its creation. There were platters of juicy, ripe tomatoes in every hue of red and gold, their skins glistening in the soft light of the room. Baskets of crisp, green lettuce and tender, young spinach sat alongside bowls of fragrant herbs, basil, oregano, and thyme, their leaves still wet with the morning dew. At the end of the table, a tower of zucchini and summer squash rose like a sculpture, their smooth, green skins interspersed with the bright yellows and deep greens of their fellow gourd family members. And in the center, like a jewel in a crown, sat a magnificent pumpkin, its rich, orange flesh seeming to glow from within. As Arthur stood there, taking in the abundance and diversity of the harvest, he felt a lump form in his throat. He thought back to those early days of the garden club, when he and Lily had first broken ground on their modest plots, their hands shaking with nervousness and excitement. He remembered the first tiny seedlings pushing their way through the soil, the wonder and joy on Max's face as he watched them grow day by day. And he remembered the challenges they had faced, the long days of toil under the blistering sun, the nights spent worrying over the fate of their delicate charges. The drought had been the worst of it, a relentless force of nature that had threatened to undo all their hard work and dedication. But they had persevered, had come together as a community to share their knowledge, their resources, and their unwavering belief in the power of growth and renewal. And now, as he looked out over the sea of smiling faces, the tables laden with the fruits of their labors, he knew that it had all been worth it. Clearing his throat, Arthur raised his voice to be heard over the happy chatter of the crowd. "Friends," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "I want to thank you all for being here today, for sharing in this celebration of all that we have accomplished together." A hush fell over the room as all eyes turned to him, the air crackling with anticipation. "When we first started this journey," he continued, "I don't think any of us could have imagined just how far we would come. We were just a handful of neighbors with a shared love of gardening, a desire to bring a little more beauty and bounty into our lives." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the faces of those who had become more than just neighbors, but true friends and partners in this great adventure. "But look at us now," he said, his voice rising with pride and wonder. "Look at what we have created, together. Not just a collection of gardens, but a true community, a family bound together by our love for the earth and for each other." As he spoke, Arthur could see the emotions playing out on the faces of those around him. The tender smiles, the glistening eyes, the nods of recognition and agreement. And in that moment, he knew that he was not alone, that he was part of something greater than himself, a tapestry of lives and stories woven together by the simple act of planting a seed. "I know that the road ahead will not always be easy," he continued, his voice growing more serious. "There will be more challenges to face, more obstacles to overcome. But I also know that we have the strength, the resilience, and the love to weather any storm, to grow and thrive no matter what life may throw our way." He raised his glass, the light catching the amber liquid within and casting a warm glow over his face. "So let us raise a toast," he declared, his voice ringing out clear and strong, "to the power of community, to the magic of growth and renewal, and to the incredible bounty that we have created together. To the harvest." A chorus of cheers and clinking glasses filled the air as the crowd echoed his sentiment, their faces alight with joy and camaraderie. And as Arthur looked out over the sea of smiling faces, he felt a sense of peace and contentment wash over him, a deep knowing that he was exactly where he was meant to be. As the celebration continued, the room buzzed with conversation and laughter, as neighbors shared stories of their triumphs and challenges in the garden. Arthur made his way through the crowd, stopping to chat with each person, marveling at the way their passion for plants had brought them together in ways he never could have imagined. There was Rashid, the pharmacist, who spoke with quiet intensity about the medicinal properties of the herbs he had grown, and how they had helped him find a sense of purpose and connection in his new community. I never knew that something as simple as a basil leaf could hold so much power, he mused, his eyes shining with wonder. But working with these plants, learning their secrets, it's given me a whole new perspective on life. And there was Jake, the young writer, who had once seemed so lost and adrift, but who now stood tall and confident, his voice filled with excitement as he shared his latest project. "I've been writing about our gardens," he explained, his hands gesturing animatedly as he spoke, "about the way they've transformed not just our yards, but our lives. I never knew that words could have such power, but telling these stories, it's given me a sense of purpose I never had before." As Arthur listened to their stories, he couldn't help but feel a sense of awe and gratitude for the way that their shared love of gardening had brought them together, had given them a common language and a sense of belonging that transcended age, background, and experience. And then there was Lily, his first and most dedicated student, who had blossomed under his guidance like a flower reaching for the sun. She stood at the center of a small group, her face glowing with pride as she shared the story of her own journey, from a struggling single mother to a confident and capable gardener. "I never knew that I had it in me," she confessed, her voice trembling with emotion. "But working with Arthur, learning from him and from all of you, it's shown me that I am capable of so much more than I ever dreamed. And now, with the skills and knowledge I've gained, I feel like I can take on anything." As the evening wore on and the plates of food began to dwindle, the conversation turned to the future, to the dreams and plans that had taken root in the hearts and minds of the gardeners. Ideas were shared and debated, seeds of inspiration planted and nurtured by the collective wisdom and enthusiasm of the group. Some spoke of expanding the community garden, of turning the vacant lot down the street into a verdant oasis where anyone could come to learn and grow. Others dreamed of starting a seed library, a way to preserve and share the heirloom varieties that had been passed down through generations. And still others spoke of the power of gardening to heal and transform, to bring light into the darkest corners of the soul. They shared stories of addiction and trauma, of loss and grief, and how the simple act of tending to a plant had given them a reason to keep going, to believe in the possibility of growth and renewal. Through it all, Arthur listened and nodded, his heart swelling with pride and affection for these incredible people who had become his family. He knew that there would be challenges ahead, that the road to a truly sustainable and thriving community was long and winding. But he also knew that they had the strength, the resilience, and the love to see it through, to weather any storm and emerge stronger and more beautiful on the other side. As the last of the dishes were cleared away and the guests began to say their goodbyes, Arthur found himself drawn to the community garden, to the little patch of earth that had started it all. He walked among the beds, his fingers trailing over the leaves and stems, marveling at the way they had grown and flourished under the care and attention of so many hands. And then he saw them, Lily and Max, kneeling together in the dirt, their faces alight with wonder as they examined a cluster of ripe cherry tomatoes. Arthur watched as Lily plucked one from the vine, holding it up to the light and marveling at its perfect, glossy sheen. "Look, Max," she whispered, her voice filled with awe and reverence. "Look at what we grew together. Isn't it beautiful?" Max nodded, his eyes wide with excitement as he reached out to touch the delicate fruit. "It's like magic," he breathed, his voice filled with the pure, unadulterated joy of a child discovering the wonders of the world for the first time. And in that moment, Arthur knew that he was looking at the future, at the seeds of hope and possibility that had been planted in the hearts of the next generation. He knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, no matter how hard the road might be, that there would always be those who were willing to take up the mantle, to carry on the work of growing and nurturing and building a better world. With a smile on his face and a song in his heart, Arthur made his way back to the community center, to the warmth and light and laughter of the people who had become his family. And as he walked, he couldn't help but marvel at the incredible journey that had brought him to this moment, at the way that a simple patch of earth had grown into something so much bigger and more beautiful than he ever could have imagined. Inside the center, the celebration was winding down, the last of the guests trickling out into the cool night air. But even as the room began to empty, the energy and excitement of the evening lingered, a palpable force that seemed to fill the very air itself. Arthur found himself in conversation with Sophie, the art teacher, who was practically vibrating with enthusiasm as she shared her latest idea. "I've been thinking," she said, her eyes sparkling with creativity, "about how we can use our gardens as a teaching tool, a way to inspire and engage our students in new and exciting ways." She went on to describe her vision for a series of garden-based art projects, from natural dye workshops to plein-air painting sessions in the midst of the blooming beds. "Imagine the possibilities," she breathed, her hands sketching shapes in the air as she spoke. "The colors, the textures, the way that nature can open up whole new worlds of imagination and expression." Arthur nodded, his own mind racing with ideas and possibilities. He thought of the way that gardening had opened up new avenues of creativity and connection in his own life, of the incredible beauty and diversity that could be found in even the smallest patch of earth. "I love it," he said, his voice filled with genuine enthusiasm. "And I think it's just the beginning of what we can do, of the ways that we can use our gardens to inspire and educate and bring people together." As the last of the guests made their way out into the night and the center grew quiet once more, Arthur found himself alone with his thoughts, his heart full to bursting with the joy and gratitude of the evening. He thought of the incredible community that had grown up around him, of the way that a shared love of the earth and its bounty had brought them together in ways he never could have imagined. He thought of the challenges they had faced, the obstacles they had overcome, and the incredible resilience and determination that had seen them through. And he thought of the future, of the seeds of hope and possibility that had been planted in the hearts and minds of all those who had come together to celebrate the harvest. He knew that there would be more challenges ahead, more obstacles to overcome, and more lessons to learn. But he also knew that they would face them together, armed with the knowledge and the passion and the love that had brought them this far. They would continue to grow and to thrive, to create something beautiful and enduring in the midst of an ever-changing world. With a final glance around the empty room, Arthur made his way to the door, stepping out into the cool, crisp night air. The stars glittered overhead, a vast and endless expanse of possibility and wonder. And as he made his way down the quiet streets, the sound of his footsteps echoing in the stillness, Arthur knew that he was exactly where he was meant to be. The garden had brought him home, had given him a sense of purpose and belonging that he had never known before. And now, as he looked out over the sleeping neighborhood, the houses nestled together like seeds in a pod, he knew that the best was yet to come. The harvest was just the beginning, a celebration of all that they had accomplished and a promise of all that was yet to be. With a smile on his face and a spring in his step, Arthur turned towards home, towards the little patch of earth that had started it all. And as he walked, he could almost feel the pulse of life beneath his feet, the steady rhythm of growth and renewal that would carry them forward, season after season, year after year. The Harvest Festival had been a triumph, a testament to the incredible power of community and connection. And as the last of the lights winked out and the neighborhood settled into the peaceful stillness of the night, Arthur knew that they had only just begun to scratch the surface of what was possible. Together, they would continue to plant and to nurture, to grow and to thrive. They would face the challenges and the changes that lay ahead with courage and compassion, with open hearts and minds and a deep, abiding love for the earth and for each other. And in the end, they would reap the rewards of all that they had sown, the fruits of their labors and their love, the harvest of a lifetime spent in service to something greater than themselves. With a final, contented sigh, Arthur climbed the steps to his own front door, the warmth and light of home beckoning him forward. And as he stepped inside, he knew that he was exactly where he was meant to be, surrounded by the love and the laughter and the incredible, unshakable spirit of the community that had grown up around him. The Harvest Festival had been a celebration of all that they had accomplished and a promise of all that was yet to come. And as Arthur settled into his favorite chair, the flickering light of the lamp casting a warm glow over the room, he knew that the best was yet to be, that the seeds they had planted would continue to grow and flourish, season after season, year after year, for generations to come.